few moments ago, before I walked on stage, I was aware that there was this story playing out in my head. It was actually a dance between two stories. One story was noticing the size of this audience and the cameras that are around, and was telling me that now would not be a good time to trip over a shoelace or forget any lines. And the other story in my head was telling me to be grateful for this opportunity. Go out, relish the experience, and have fun. I was aware that whichever story took hold might impact the next 12 minutes of my life and determine how this talk unfolds. Therapists and psychologists tell us that the stories we tell ourselves play a fundamental role in how we interact with the world around us. Some people tell themselves that they are not enough. Other people tell themselves that they're imposters. And if you've ever seen the auditions of a television singing competition, some people tell themselves they're a little better than they actually are. But apart from the individual stories we tell ourselves, all of us are also taking part in larger collective stories that shape our behaviour as a species. A collective story enables people in India to treat cows as sacred, while people in America cram cows into feedlots. Our internal and external worlds are full of stories that shape our behaviours. Today, I want to talk about a collective story that most people aren't even aware they're inhabiting. It is a collective story that tells us that human beings are separate and superior to nature. It is a story that has taken us so close to the brink of an unimaginable crisis that our survival now depends on us telling a new story. So, once upon a time, in a land far away, and right here actually, on the lands that we're gathered today, the majority of people on planet Earth had a deep reverence and respect for nature. They saw very little separation between themselves and the world around them. Many cultures saw nature as a giving parent. The plants and the animals were their relatives. Indigenous Australians saw themselves as custodians of the land, while the ancient Chinese considered themselves reverent guests of nature. Even prominent figures of Rome, like Ovid and Seneca, argued that mining shouldn't be permissible, as it was too abusive to the natural world. But then things started to change. A new craze called Christianity began to take hold. Word spread that their one God sat above and outside nature, and that God had made people in his own image and given them dominion over the earth. Sounds all right, said the people, passing on the news to friends and relatives, missionaries, kings. The world was made for the sake of man, that it may serve him, said the Bishop of Paris in the early 12th century. The Christian craze had now infiltrated Europe and was beginning its march into the Americas. But wait, there's more, said a couple of fancy-looking men in the early 1600s. They told the people that they were from the scientific revolution and that they could empower the people even further. We must hound nature in her wanderings, said the first man, Francis Bacon, the father of modern science. We must find a way at length into her inner chambers. We must reveal the secrets still locked in nature's bosom. Make her your slave, subdue her, shake her to her foundations. Yes, said the men. It sounds all right. The second man then chimed in. His name was René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy. He confirmed to the people that yes, they were superior to nature, and added that animals were mindless machines to be mastered and exploited at will. Well, that's a relief, said the people. Now we don't have to feel so bad about whipping our oxen. The influence of these two men, coupled with the religious craze, meant that nature was no longer seen as a living thing to be revered and respected, but instead as a machine to be manipulated for the benefits of mankind. This was a new and exciting story that set free natural resources for humans to achieve social and economic progress, even if obtained through violent and suppressive acts. This new story was particularly enticing for the emerging capitalists of the time because a nature devoid of reverence and respect was much easier to commodify. And commodify they did. The humans went to work entering and penetrating all of those inner chambers. They tunnelled her bosom for coal and metals. They scraped and ploughed at her skin with their tractors. They took chainsaws to her forests of follicles and they filled her waters with their waste. The new story had spread across the globe. Humans had asserted their dominance. They built wondrous things and improved the lives of billions of people, particularly in specific regions. Until one day, their scientists began to notice. Her animals are decreasing. Her atmosphere is heating. Her soils are eroding. Our research is foreboding. But still the humans carried on. You see, they couldn't hear the scientists because the facts don't matter much if they don't fit the story. And the story was deeply embedded now. In 2019, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency in the US opposes regulations because he says, we have a responsibility to harvest the natural resources that we've been blessed with. A prominent evangelist tells his followers that refusing to use fossil fuels hurts God's feelings. The story was so embedded that the humans' nightly news bulletins measured their success by financial metrics alone, while the living world that allowed the gains in those metrics was being eviscerated, out of sight. And the story was so embedded that when researchers looked at the names of trees, birds, flowers, and other key words relating to nature, used across millions of books, songs, and movies from 1900 to 2014, they found a dramatic decline in the use of those words across that period. The humans were spending 7 hours a day on their screens. So not only were they experiencing fewer stories and actual experiences of nature, but they were being bombarded by up to 10,000 advertisements a day, largely for products that were inflicting even more ecological damage. Nature was being hounded in her wanderings. And yet the humans remained trapped in their story, trapped in their cultural programming, like goldfish in a tank, unaware of the unfolding chaos beyond the coloured pebbles and the artificial logs. And so when those same scientists resorted to blocking traffic and tying themselves to poles, or screaming that the Amazon rainforest, the most spectacular of all her forests, was nearing a tipping point that would turn her into a savanna, still the humans did nothing. Because to them, those trees that were home to thousands of species of animals and millions of species of insects, those trees that sent nutrients to each other via underground fungal networks, those trees that transpired moisture into the air to create rainfall that would feed crops in countries thousands of kilometres away, those trees were just timber for decking, pulp for toilet paper, or space for more cows. Those trees were worth more dead than alive, because that's what the story had told them. But then something remarkable happened. It started with the children who began to skip school and take to the streets. It started with the farmers who chose to stop fighting nature and instead rebuild their soils. It started when the Indigenous people, who for centuries had been reminding everybody of their story, were finally being listened to. And it started when nature herself, through fires and storms, through droughts and rising waters, forced her way back into the people's lives and demanded their respect. A new regenerative story about human beings and nature was emerging. But of course, it wasn't a new story at all. It was the retelling of an old story. But this time, the old story was supported by the science. And it was telling the people that every breath they took was dependent on trees and phytoplankton, and that trillions of bacteria and fungi lived on them and in them and kept them alive. Viewing the natural world as separate to humans was now empirically false. Humans are nature. But the science was also telling them that plants could see, they could smell, hear, they could learn and store memories, that dolphins gossiped and spoke in local dialects, elephants held ceremonies for dead relatives, grasshoppers could turn into locusts and back again in a matter of hours, and that termites had built an underground metropolis the size of the United Kingdom. The same scientific inquiry that had led to domination and extraction had gone so deep into nature's bosom that it was revealing her secrets. And her secrets were divulging that she was anything but mechanistic, that she was deserving of the utmost reverence and respect, and that the original story had been right all along. And so perhaps now the humans would no longer refer to nature as an unruly female to be tamed, or an it to be exploited, but would refer to nature simply as kin. Nobody knows how this new but old story ends, because it is still being written. But if it is to have the Hollywood ending, if we are to break free from our cultural programming and pull off the miraculous comeback when all seems lost, then the new but old story will have to be rapidly spread throughout the culture. It will need to be embedded into all levels of curriculum, particularly at the early stages, so children can see the world as a living system, not as a machine full of stocks and commodities. It will need to inform a redesign of the economy, so it values nature and reflects the true environmental costs of the materials we all use. It will need to revamp the nightly news bulletins, so we measure soil health, atmospheric pollution, species loss, alongside the financial metrics. And crucially, the new but old story will need to be amplified by the storytellers, the musicians, the artists, those that can create the emotional connection to the living world once again and paint visions of a nature-filled future that people can see and feel and strive for. Because stories shape culture. Culture shapes leaders, leaders shape policies, and policies shape the system. And perhaps, just perhaps, one day, a few hundred years from now, historians will look back to this moment and they'll see that amongst the chaos and the nihilism and the fear and the extinctions, that there were groups of people who chose to turn the page and begin to write a new chapter for humanity. A chapter full of diverse characters from a range of professions and places who came together to create a thriving, regenerative, ecological future. The end.